March 18th, 2020. Just as a little benchmark of where we are. We're right in the middle of this virus thing, but we're not going to mention it too much, and we're just going to plow right through this thing. So my guest today is Hillary Nappi, and Hillary is an attorney at Hach, Rose, Shareppa, and Chevry, and they handle complex litigation. And Hillary specializes in sexual abuse claims. Yeah, Hillary, I think one of the most interesting things is that you were a defense attorney prior to getting into this sector of the law. So just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you want the people to know, and then I'd love to go into that story about how you transitioned into what you're doing now.
Sure. So first of all, I'm just going to plug our website only because I feel like a lot of your listeners can probably benefit from some of the general information that we have posted for survivors of sexual abuse and sexual assault. So our website is www.sexualabusesurvivorlawfirm.com. And we have an entire section dedicated to the recent law changes. And, we have a lot of news articles that are posted. So for people who are not yet ready to talk about what they've experienced and lived through, there's a couple of resources that may be helpful to you so you can just sort of read along and educate yourself.
Sure.
So I started my career working at a white shoe firm, working for one of the best trial attorneys in the country. And started out as a paralegal, and I was there for almost 10 years. I went to law school at night. And when I got out of school, I worked there as an attorney, and I really just wanted to be in a courtroom. So I took a different job. I worked at a really tiny law firm in Westchester County, which is where I was born and raised, and where I still live. And to me, it seemed like the best way of learning how to litigate and actually be in a courtroom was to get involved with criminal work, because unfortunately there are so many cases in the country, right? I mean, like, you pick a state and that system is generally overrun. So I was a defense attorney, and it was kind of trying on my morals. As an attorney, you owe every single client that you represent a duty of care and loyalty, and to go in there and vigorously do your job. That's your job.
Sure.
So, if you're an attorney, you have to respect the rule of law and precedent. And that means that even people who commit crimes, even the most heinous crimes and the ones that make our skin crawl, still deserve a defense, right? And if you believe in the system and in justice and what you invested your life in by going to law school, then you know that the Constitution means that even people who commit crimes have to have a lawyer who defends them. Because if we don't stick up for everybody, then when the innocent person is in that position, they don't get the same protection of the law. So as good as I was in that role, and my clients liked me, I would come home at night and not be able to sleep, because when I did my job right, people went back home, and those people often found themselves in the cycle of violence. And often, when I represented people who were sexual offenders, they had been victimized themselves.
Sure.
Right? So, I mean, there's a psychology behind it, and it is what it is. So I was pretty good at what I did, and it made me feel like a terrible human.
Let me ask you, was there something in particular? Was there a day? Do you remember the day
I do.
that you were just like, I can't do this anymore?
I do. I had a client who was charged with having over 2,000 images of child porn featuring children between the ages of 3 and 8 and various sexual acts. And when I was interviewing him outside of court and preparing for a court appearance, he brought his wife. And his wife came in and she started screaming and cursing at me, telling me that I had to make sure that this case went away because her husband was not somebody who victimized children. And it sort of just hit me in that moment that I'm like, if he's watching a child be raped, then he's exploiting a child.
For sure.
And so maybe you're not the person that's actually committing that act, but you are the person who is promoting it. And you're the person who's creating the demand in a market. And so when I tried to explain that to her, I realized it was falling on deaf ears and that this was not the job for me. I had a successful result in his case, and he was sentenced to a term of probation, no time in jail, and allowed to go back home with his 2 young children.
Wow.
And when he hugged me inside the courtroom, court officers rushed him, and I just remember going, "There's no touching the attorneys," and I was like, "I have to find a new job." So
How long were you there for?
Almost 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And how far into it were you? So you were a fresh attorney coming. You must have been right off the bat super gung ho, I would assume.
I was practicing for.
Was it a gradual process though?
So I was practicing for a year before I started doing criminal defense work.
Okay.
And I would say the first 6 months were really tough because my very first case as a criminal defense attorney was the negligent homicide of a 5-year-old girl. So it started off pretty intense.
Pretty rugged, yeah. That's
Yeah,
serious
and
stuff.
it kind of continued. So a lot of attorneys, when they start out in the criminal defense world, they're trying traffic tickets, right? And they're doing DWIs, and I did my share. I totally did my share of that, and it's a great way to learn the court system, and it's an important function, right? Because most people have their interaction with the criminal justice system through traffic stops.
Right. Not Hillary.
I went the other way, right?
You did.
So I had friends that were starting out in the business, and they were trying traffic tickets, and I was walking into a felony that was televised on national TV, and I just, you have to pick it up, right? I mean, you have a client that depends on you, so it was what it was.
Let me ask you this. So in that whole process, did you ever become disenchanted with the system? I mean, did it ever make you want to question the whole judicial system in general, or you were able to kind of soldier on and say you just needed a change?
No, I mean, it made me have faith in it, right?
Wow.
So you go to court as an attorney and you prepare as hard as you can, right? And you go through every single piece of evidence looking for the loophole to try to save your client.
Right.
And so if your client committed the crime and the police did their job and they did everything procedurally correctly and the DA did everything correctly procedurally, then the case is on its merits, right? And if you try the case to a verdict and your client doesn't take a plea, which sometimes people do because they're afraid of risking what a jury will do, right? So if you do everything correctly and everyone does everything correctly, then it's a fair trial. If somebody is not following the procedure that's set forth by the Constitution and by the law, I mean, then don't they deserve a fair shake?
For sure.
So if you have faith in the system and you play your cards ethically the way you're supposed to, and everyone does, it usually works out the way it's supposed to.
Now, when you left that firm and you got to where you are now, what was the first case you encountered when you were at the firm that you're on now?
So when I joined Hach, Sherpa, and Chevry, we were not doing sexual abuse cases because the law hadn't changed yet. So I walked in and I was doing a bunch of constitutional cases, class actions, employment discrimination cases. And we do all that. But probably about a year and a half in, New York State passed the Child Victims Act, which is this brand new statute that allows people who were sexually assaulted as children years ago a 1-year look back window to file a claim, right? So if you are watching TV right now, you're seeing the ads all over the place, looking for cases against the Catholic Church or the Boy Scouts. That's because the statute was just passed.
So when the day that they passed that, they had 1 year to file a case against somebody if they were sexual abused at any time in their life.
So that's a little vague. And
a little broad. Yeah.
So
yes.
The statute does two things. The first thing that it does, right, is that it allows people who are currently being abused or assaulted and who yet don't have the strength to report it to the police, but are still children, a bigger window of time, right, to report that and to have the district attorney and the police, the police investigate it and the district attorney decide whether or not they're going to prosecute the case. So that expanded the criminal statute of limitations, unfortunately, right? And I don't know how many of your listeners know the distinction, but there's two tracks of the justice system, right? One is criminal prosecution, right, which is what you see on Law and Order, right? It's what prosecutors and what police officers do. And then the other track is a civil remedy, right? So civil remedies are when people file lawsuits because they are looking for financial compensation because of their wrong. So somebody who's been sexually abused in New York State and in New Jersey and in most states in the country, right, have two tracks. They can have the police investigate and file criminal charges once the DA looks at the file and decides that there's enough to charge somebody. And the other end of it is a civil lawsuit. And so civilly, right, you can sue the person who abused you if they have assets. If the person sexually assaulted someone or sexually abused someone in the course of their employment, then there may be a cause of action against the employer, right? And so that's what's going on right now, right? So if you look at the Harvey Weinsteins of the world,
Yeah.
these, rich business moguls, right? I mean, people are coming out of the woodwork
I
and
believe
looking
it.
to them, right? And then you have a huge group of people who were not sexually abused or assaulted
Mhm.
by somebody rich and famous, right? And
Right.
so this law is trying to give those people equal footing to come forward and prosecute their claims civilly to obtain some sort of compensation, hopefully to help with their therapy and the difficulties that survivors of sexual assault and sexual abuse typically go through.
What are the ranges of, I don't know I don't know what the proper term is, but what are the range that if a person wins a particular case, what constitutes, what are the range of damages, and how does that play out monetarily to people? What do you see?
So that is a very common question that a lot of people ask when they call.
Sure.
And it's sort of hard to give somebody a number. So there's a lot
Mhm.
of lawyers, I think, out there that are going to tell people, oh, your claim is worth millions and millions of dollars.
Right.
That may not necessarily be true, right? Unfortunately, there are buckets of the severity of the sexual abuse, right?
Sure.
And I don't want to downplay it because trauma is individual.
Mhm.
So when somebody goes, you and I could go through the exact same pattern of abuse.
Absolutely.
We have the exact same abuser. He or she could do the exact same things to you and I. And you may turn around and go, well, that was unpleasant. And maybe
Mhm.
you're angry and you scream and you yell and you cry it out. And then you somehow figure out a way to move forward and like forge ahead with your life. I may turn around and go, nope, never coming out of my house again. I'm a hermit.
Right.
I want to slit my wrists. I try to kill myself. I develop complex PTSD. I
Mhm.
have a drinking problem. I have a drug problem. I'm promiscuous. There's all kinds of things that people go through as a result of this. And it's just individual. So I usually tell everyone who calls me, I'm not going to give you a number until I investigate your case, right? I'm going to talk to you about your abuse. I'm going to figure out what happened to you, how many times it happened to you.
Mhm.
I'm going to look at their medical records,
Mhm.
because there's going to be a lot of hidden things in there. And unfortunately, sometimes when a child is physically sexually assaulted, there's a physical ramification, right? I mean, our bodies go through puberty for a reason.
For sure.
And, a 5-year-old is not supposed to be having sex.
Right.
So if somebody is repeatedly sexually assaulted at such a young age, it can cause a physical issue
Mhm.
that as adults they're still dealing with. So it's a really broad question. I mean, I think the
There's a
news.
lot of subjectivity in there, right? I
Yes,
mean, yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And so if you look at the news right now, right, they're reporting all these, millions of dollars in settlements across the board, and that's absolutely true. And then there's some people that walk away with $50,000. So, it really runs the gamut. And in my view, a thorough, honest attorney is not going to give anybody a number just by talking to them like this. There's just so much more that goes into it.
You know, so Hillary, so I know people out there, I would think the majority of people that are listening have been through some type of trauma in their life before. How, okay, how do you prove things that happened eons ago? What is the process with that? How do you get that out of the perpetrator, and how does that work? Because
So,
can't people just deny it to the end of time? Like, how does that go?
so these cases are kind of no different than a regular rape case in the sense that sometimes they become he said, she said.
Right.
So there's a lot of different ways that we're kind of going around the evidentiary issues. I don't want to give away all my litigation strategy in case
No.
attorneys
You got to pay for that. Yeah, for
But
sure.
that being said, right, it's traditional ways of corroborating that a person was at the place, date, and time. A lot of times there's a criminal conviction, right? Or a report was made simultaneously. A lot of my clients disclose their abuse to therapists 20 years ago.
Okay.
A big piece of it is going to be using expert witnesses to, kind of prove that certain things in these people's lives are common results, of childhood sexual abuse. So, I mean, look, I think law firms are doing their due diligence and they're deciding which cases have evidentiary merit.
Sure.
Sometimes, unfortunately, there are cases that you just can't prove.
Right.
And so, I think that that's a law firm's call on whether or not they take a specific case. But
For sure.
look, I mean, when I evaluate a case, if there's a criminal conviction, it always makes my job easier because a jury or the abuser, allocated at sentencing and admitted that they had committed those acts.
Mhm.
So that's a lot easier because then I'm not dealing with whether or not the sexual abuse actually happened. It's more about what the effect was on my client, and whether or not the entity that I'm suing had responsibility, which created liability for them.
So the effect that it had is a deciding factor in the level of damages that could be pursued.
Exactly.
Okay. So like you said, so if something did not affect somebody, person A, as it did person B, although it was the same exact act, you have to prove a level of damages that could warrant a particular amount
Of money. Exactly.
amount of money.
Exactly.
Wow. So it's not necessarily the act that was committed, it's the result of the act.
In some cases, and in some cases, you have to prove every single step. And look, you have to prove every single step for every trial.
For sure.
Right? For every case. But some things you have evidence that just goes to that fact, and it's not an issue in what I need to prepare for, right? Because I know I have this evidence, a conviction, a confession, right? And so every case is really individual. It's fascinating to me because prior to educating myself really about this, I think I had a lot of stereotypes in my head. And then I really started talking to people. I mean, my firm has talked, I would say, probably thousands of people. It doesn't mean that we've taken every single case, but each phone call teaches me something different. Because every person is they come at their trauma and what they've survived from a different angle.
Let me ask you, because we were talking about, you're taking these calls from people. Who are the people that you demographically? I know we spoke briefly about it, but it's across the board, isn't it, for you? Age, race, gender.
So I have clients of every single race. I have clients, male and female. My youngest current client right now is 14. And my oldest client is 81.
81 years old.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. I have people who were abused by women, people who were abused by men.
Right.
I mean, the abuser profile runs the gamut, right? Different races, different ages, socioeconomic status. I mean, it really humbles you very quickly because you realize that if you were lucky enough to not be one of the statistics in life, you realize quickly that probably somebody that you grew up with was. And it's eye-opening, quite frankly.
Now, the relation to the victim, as we were talking when we first started talking, how you were telling me it's typically not somebody, a stranger off the street or somebody that's snatched. What are you seeing as far as the relationship between victim and perpetrator usually is?
So it's sort of fascinating because I think if you watch movies and TV, right, they always paint the picture that somebody's big and scary and a stranger in a mask. Yes, there are definitely those kinds of cases, but most often it's someone that has a relationship to a child in that child's life and abuses that relationship, right? Abusers are very keen on knowing what type of victim to pick, right? Children who feel ostracized or who feel like they don't have a voice already because they're going through something at home. Maybe they have an alcoholic parent. Maybe they have a single parent household. Maybe they're in foster care and they don't have their own parent, right? And they're shuffled from home to home. They know that if they pick, so those people figure out ways to bond with the child fast, try to build the child's trust so then they can abuse that child. So lots of my cases, I have, repeated stories, and it's fascinating to hear my clients realize at the time they're talking about, like reflecting back in time, they're like, oh yeah, that was a grooming behavior. So a lot of people will spend time grooming a child and building their trust so that they can then later abuse it.
Mm-hmm. That grooming is a topic that I touch upon a lot with my clients, and there seems to be as far as the grooming is concerned. Can you talk a little bit about grooming and what that is for people who may not know exactly what goes into that?
Right. So it's a pattern of reward or like special attention, something
Hmm.
to make the child feel like they can trust the adult that's going to abuse them, right?
Hmm.
So maybe you're getting special awards at a camp or
Hmm.
extra playing time on a basketball team, or your parents can't afford to buy you the newest iPhone, so your
Right.
abuser buys you it.
Hmm.
A lot of times, it's just the attention that children aren't getting at home. It's, a teacher takes an extra liking and will sit and spend extra time teaching someone to read.
Hmm.
I've heard all kinds of behaviors,
Jeez.
and I think it sort of depends on what the role is, right? I
Hmm.
mean, you have coaches giving extra playing time or helping kids with, applications for scholarships. I mean, I have a couple
Sure.
of cases where the abuser was a teacher and actually wrote a letter of recommendation for a college. And once,
Hmm.
a high school student is like depending on that, they
Sure.
threaten to revoke the letter if the student doesn't
Okay.
comply.
Okay.
So it it's it's just out there, right? And I think that sometimes when these things are happening, kids don't have a context for sex, right? The younger you are, the less you know. You hear things from your
Sure.
friends, or if you're like most people, you're having your first experience with someone who's the same age as you or
Hmm.
close to it in age, and they don't know either. So
Hmm.
it's
It's an awkward
it's
situation
an
for
awkward
both.
situation
Yeah.
for everyone, right? But
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
have an adult in that situation who understands what's going on, they know how to manipulate a child into thinking that this is some sort of expression of friendship or love or what adults and children do, which we all know that's not correct, right? But
Hmm.
it's oftentimes that a child who's being abused in the abuse doesn't recognize that. It's part of the reason why they don't necessarily disclose it. The
Right.
other part is after the abuse happens, these people are very creative in making threats to children, right? It's more than just don't tell or I'll hurt you again. It's, I'll kill your parents.
Right.
I'll revoke your acceptance to college. If you tell me, if it's a foster parent, you'll be put into a group home. If it's one parent, the other parent will beat you.
Hmm.
I mean, I've heard all kinds of horror stories, to be honest with you, and each one is kind of worse than the next.
Jeez.
But it goes to the fact that there's a huge stigma associated with it as well, right? I think that now we're living in a different generation, right? And we're talking about this more openly, but for a long time, this just was not a topic that most people felt comfortable talking about, and a lot of people still don't. Um, Particularly my clients who are men feel very uncomfortable,
Sure.
um, because they may not, if it was a same-sex abuser, right, they may not necessarily be attracted to men. And there's a shame and stigma associated with that because that's what colored their sexuality
Sure.
as a young child. So they don't have
Sure.
a context for it at all.
Now you said your youngest client is 14 years old. How
Yes,
does a 14-year-old? Obviously, there has to be a guardian or a parent that
correct,
introduces this to you.
correct.
I know you can't speak specifically about that particular client, but how does that usually happen? That a parent or guardian brings this to your attention?
Right. So when a child, right, here's the reality, right? With or without the new statute, if you are sexually assaulted and sexually abused, you have a civil claim.
Hmm.
And so if you have been victimized, you can contact a lawyer. This
Hmm.
this and you should, right?
Hmm.
This particular statute just created a look back window for people who already missed the statute of limitations. So they had a cause of action, but so much time had passed and they couldn't find an attorney because they were time barred.
Hmm.
So people who
Right.
are currently being abused, I think that the conversation is so prevalent in society that people now are kind of educating themselves in a way that people couldn't do 20 years ago.
Hmm.
So in this particular case, after my client was assaulted, her parents reached out to me.
Hmm.
And so we're pursuing the civil aspect of it in a timely
Okay.
fashion, right? We didn't have to go back and use this statute as a way of doing that.
You said like so your client was assaulted, but I think sometimes there's a little gray area as to what constitutes sexual impropriety to begin with.
Right.
I think you were telling me you had an anecdote that you told me. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but is that area gray sometimes?
So it is, right? I mean, here's the thing. I joke with people and I'm like, there are acts that are always bad, and acts that are sometimes bad under the law, right? And so what the Child Victims Act does is that it revives the cause of action for specific acts under the penal code. But it goes back to the year that a person was assaulted, or abused, right? So right now, if you're on a subway and somebody brushes up against you and touches your genitals, that's sexual abuse. It's a misdemeanor. The person can face up to a year in jail. However, that wasn't necessarily always a crime, right? So it depends on what the year is. And the example that I give people is in New York State, up until 1992, a man could legally rape his wife. If you were married, you were subject to be raped. That's
1992?
Up to 1992.
Oh my God.
Right. So sometimes when people call me and they tell me the year that they were abused, I have to look at the penal code and see if what they experienced at that time would have been a crime.
Wow.
So I mean, there are things that happen to people that are always wrong, just may not be something that we can sue for at this time, right? I mean, if things happen now, they're classified as crimes. People are in a different boat, right? And society is different. I mean, watching your face when you just heard that about 1992.
Yeah, because it's not that long ago. Yeah.
Right. So it's fascinating, but it's also, I think, a reflection of how far we have come as a society. When I have these conversations with my mother about what it was like when she was my age or when she was younger than me and out dating and in the world, right? There were things that you just didn't talk about. And it's not that people didn't experience them. They just didn't speak about it.
For sure.
I look at, my friends and my family members that are my age and what they go through and people that are a little younger than me, and it's completely different. So
absolutely, it is different.
It's the change in society.
Now, like when people are calling your office, I mean, so how do you deal with, because I would assume that people are highly charged when they call you.
I try to
distraught. Yeah, how do you deal with, and how do you kind of manage their expectations? Because I would assume that people want these perpetrators put under the jail.
So I first try to explain the difference between what my role is. A lot of people don't understand that no matter what I do for them, I can never necessarily put their abuser behind bars, right? I mean, I may be able to assist them and put them in contact with an assistant district attorney who can, see if there's merit to still commencing an investigation. Perhaps this person still has contact with children. So there are cases when I can assist with that, right? But it's never in my purview. I just don't have that power in what I do. So the first step is explaining that to people. And it's sort of heartbreaking sometimes when you're on the phone with someone and they're not about it for the money. I have a current case right now that I'm litigating, and my client has expressly told me she doesn't care if she receives $1 a month from her abuser. She would be more than satisfied with that because every time he had to write that check, he would remember what he did to her. So there are people who are in this because it's a form of closure for them. And then there are people who really need to be compensated because they can't afford their therapy, right? They can't afford childcare while they go for therapy. Their co-pays don't cover their medication, and they have complex PTSD, and they need an antidepressant to be able to be functional and go to work, right? And earn livings to support their families and themselves. So it runs the gamut about what people are looking for, but the cardinal rule for me is this. I understand enough about, or at least I think I do, what people have been through, that I think that enough people have lied to them and manipulated them to get them to be in a position where they were abused. So I am bluntly honest with my clients, even people who call me and are potential clients, whether they like it or not, because I just don't ever want to be a person in a cycle that adds to it. And I tell them that. I'm like, you may not love what I tell you, but I'm going to always tell you the truth, and I'm going to do it in a way that's respectful. My parents brought me up by like this rule, right? You treat people the way that you want people to treat you.
Plain and simple.
So whenever I have people on the phone that are a little difficult, I try my best to not take it personal, and realize that it's just very difficult for survivors of sexual abuse and assault to even pick up the phone and call a lawyer.
And I think generally that people are uneducated about it. Generally the general population does not know how this goes. Like we were talking about it before, how a lot of us have this image in our mind that we're going to go to that Law and Order courtroom with the big oak desk and the judge with the gavel, and there's going to be 1,000,000 people in the crowd and the news cameras are going to be there, but it's not like that. Even up to this conversation, Hillary, I assumed that you would still be able to put people behind bars, but that's not the case. That's an extra step in the whole process, and you'd have to get the district attorney involved.
Exactly. It's a separate, totally separate process, right?
Interesting.
And only the police can make an arrest, and only the district attorney has the discretion to determine whether there's enough there to charge someone with a crime. Right. So with my clients, I have a couple of people right now that are in the position where their abusers are still in contact with children. And so I'm encouraging them, go file a police report. Because the reality is the police have to hear you out. There may not be enough for them to make an arrest. Right. And there may not be enough for district can do is investigate. And if they find that there's a current situation where a current child, right now a child is currently being abused, they're going to move and they're going to do something. And then that person may end up in jail. So, I always encourage everyone to do that. I mean, I'm not a police officer and I'm not a district attorney, so I can't speak more educated about it in that sense. I don't like to
speculate about that.
Tell someone else's story and what they use as a barometer, but I mean, look, you need to have probable cause to make an arrest, right? And so that's built up with a police officer doing an investigation, and that can only start if somebody reports it.
Now, like from start to finish, like how long? Because I think another misconception with this whole process is that people are hoping that this is going to be swift justice. Typically, somebody comes into your office, files the case, goes through. How long are we talking here before you see anything?
So a civil lawsuit that's not subject to the Child Victims Act right now, so somebody who, has a timely claim because they have been abused recently, it can take up to 2 to 3 years civilly. Right? Child Victims Act cases are on an expedited schedule. So when the legislature passed this bill, the Office of Court Administration, so there's an office, it's a government office that, manages all of the courts in the state of New York, right? They kind of gave this mandate to the judges that they wanted to see these cases be somewhat expedited because they expected the influx of filings that they received. And so there are specially trained judges with special parts that this is all that they handle. These cases are on expedited schedules. Discovery is moving faster. Judges are trying to push the parties to settle if that's an appropriate disposition for a case. So it's a little faster, but it still takes some time, right? I mean, I think that a lot of people watch an hour of TV and they see a proceeding happen from a dramatic telling, and they think that's how it happens. That's not right. Right? And the other thing is you're not necessarily always going to be in front of a jury, right? I mean, there may be a situation where after we do some discovery, which is when the parties exchange information, there's a settlement, right? Or after a deposition, there's a settlement. So that means that the person, my client is telling their story to maybe me and a court reporter in a conference room. They're not sitting in an open courtroom in front of 12 strangers or, a gazillion people that you see on TV. That's just not necessarily how it always happens.
It's very romanticized, these things. I think it's, and as you're telling me, it's really usually not like that. When your client, so you have a client and the person has been traumatized and they are by law have to give a deposition. And how do you deal with people who are already traumatized and then traumatized again by this whole process? How do you feel? Like, what do you do in that case?
So what I tell all my clients is this: I can't promise them too many things, but I can promise them that I'm going to be sitting next to them in the deposition, and they're not going to go in unprepared. So I get my clients to the point where they are so comfortable talking about their abuse that when I prepare them for the deposition, they're talking to me, right? And I remind them, I pretend to be the defense attorney, and I grill them, and I ask them the hard questions, and I get them used to hearing the fact that they're going to be asked personal things, and they're going to have to relive the worst moment of their life with someone who is intentionally trying to make that harder for them.
Right.
So far, it's been okay. My
Yeah.
clients are not necessarily thrilled with that first prep session because it's
Mhm.
not comfortable. But by the second time and then the third time, they're used to hearing it and they are prepared for the question and they tell the truth, and they can use the words that they need to use, right? So often, uh, grown adults can't talk about their abuse in adult language.
Mhm.
And it's fascinating because when you talk to a child who's been victimized, you expect to hear that. But a lot of these adults, I think, revert back to that time in their life as they're
Mhm.
retelling the story, and it's almost from a childlike perspective.
Sure.
So we have to get them to use specific words, right? It's not enough to say private parts, unfortunately, and
Mhm.
things like that.
So for you,
Hmm.
how does this take a toll on you personally every day? Is this something that is it easier to deal with than being a defense attorney? But what are some of the things that you take home with you? How does this make you look different? Do you look differently at the world with this?
Uh, I take everything home with me. I wish
Yeah, how
I
could
wish
you
I was
not?
I wish I was a person who didn't, and I think that there are probably a lot of attorneys that don't, and I
Uh-huh.
applaud them.
Mhm.
If they have figured out that work-life balance, please send me an email.
For
Tell me how to do
sure.
it. Tell me how to do
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
The first couple of so my firm got involved with this prior to the statute passing, so I've been
Mhm.
dealing with this for way over a year.
Mhm.
Um, the first couple months were really rough. I wasn't sleeping a lot. It was kind of like an all day experience.
Mhm.
And I definitely became bonded with a lot of my early clients
Mhm.
because, I just they needed to unload on someone.
Sure.
For a lot of people, it was the first time that somebody was really listening to them.
See that? Yeah.
So yeah, I take it all home with me. But
Mhm.
I try to use it in a positive way to be better at what I do every day.
Mhm.
It's definitely humbled me. It's made me look twice at a lot of people that I don't even really know in
I
certain
know.
circumstances.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God, like every child needs a tracking device so that you can figure out where that child is at all times, which is probably
Right.
reasonable, right? I mean,
Yeah.
kids aren't. I grew up playing kickball in the street with my friends, right?
Right.
Now, you think back and you're like, who's that weird guy that was sitting on the corner? So
Exactly.
my eyes are sort of always open. I think that it's made me probably a little jaded
Mhm.
in the sense that I'm like, okay, everybody's got some secret agenda, which
Sure.
probably not everyone does. But I
Mhm.
almost feel like if you are a little bit more cautious and hold on a little tighter, uh, kids will probably be protected more.
For
Right?
sure.
I mean, a lot of from this, I have a lot of cases actually where I'm representing kids in a lot of different circumstances, right?
Mhm.
I have a current bullying case against a school district. You just realize that once kids are ostracized, they're twice as likely to be victimized, right?
Mhm. That's
Because
the key component.
they already feel like no one's listening to them.
For sure.
And I think that happens at all stages of a child's life, right? You have little kids that feel that way for God knows what reason. You have
Mhm.
teenagers who go through it because they're teenagers,
Mhm.
and it's like the angst of growing up. So it's just a little overwhelming sometimes. And I
Mhm.
think as like we progress as a society, hopefully we're doing better for our kids, right? We're protecting them in school. We're making sure that they have an education and they know that no one should be touching them and that their body belongs to them and that they are entitled to space and privacy and, not that somebody at school is, molesting them when they should be learning math.
Mhm.
So I also think that by allowing kids to have a conversation and learn to use correct words, it's more than saying like no one touches you in your private parts, right?
Mhm.
Because sometimes I don't even know that like a 5-year-old really gets that.
Knows what that is.
They
Yeah.
just repeat back what they hear from adults.
Sure.
So right now in New York State, Aaron's Law just passed, which is a law that is going to require school districts to have sexual abuse awareness training for
Mhm.
children, for teachers, so that kids can learn the sign of sexual abuse for their classmates and sort of say, hey, I think something's wrong with Johnny tomorrow,
Right.
because let's be real, teachers have a lot of kids that they're responsible for. I think in the wake of the coronavirus, us non-teachers are learning how difficult it is
Sure.
keep a child focused all day on learning, right? And you
Mhm.
don't just have one or two kids home with you. Teachers have 30 and sometimes more in really crowded school districts.
Mhm.
So it's a lot, right? And maybe a teacher is missing the sign that something's wrong with that child and something's going on at home or, in the Boy Scouts or when they go to volunteer at church. So it's just been eye-opening for me. I don't have kids of my own, but I look at it and I go, okay, right. So all my friends' kids, my friends with children, my friends get their lecture every day from me. And they're like, right, Debbie Downer, thanks.
No, but it's like, come on, that's the real. I mean, you see it every day.
Yeah.
I mean, like, so I would imagine that it would be difficult for you not to feel some type of closeness to your client. But is there like a particular case that you feel is burned in your memory that will always hold a place in there?
All of them.
All of them.
Yeah. So I was offered a position at a bigger firm to do this work, and I chose to stay where I am because we've made this an individualized process for our clients, and so in a little way, this is kind of like my moral payback for being a defense attorney for 3 years.
Okay.
I feel like it may take me a second when someone calls me on the phone, and if I didn't have their file in front of me, but within like a minute, I can remember everything they told me on that initial intake. Wow. So even some of the people whose cases we were unable to take, their stories have affected me. I remember everybody I talked to. Wow.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I think you've been washed clean. Come on, like take it. I'll give you the. Oh my God! Like, yeah. I mean, just the fact that you recognize that in yourself, and you had that self-awareness to be like, listen, I can't stomach this anymore. I'm not going to do this.
Look, I have the highest respect for defense attorneys, right?
Sure.
I think that they actually have probably one of the biggest roles in our justice system because it is not an easy job. And you know what? Sometimes it's a really thankless job. But if defense attorneys don't do their job, and they are not the people that are advocating for people who have no voice, then our system fails. Our system fails, right? I mean, if I didn't believe in what I did, I wouldn't have invested, every penny I had in going to law school. I went to school at night, worked full time. This is all I've ever wanted to do with my life. So I believe in the system. And I think that there are people who are really cut out to be defense attorneys, and they're great. Some of my best friends are defense attorneys. My significant other is a criminal defense attorney. I don't judge them. I respect them because it's something I really just couldn't do every day. When I came home at night, I just never stopped. I wasn't happy. It wasn't a fit for me. That doesn't mean that it's not an important role. It's something that has to be done. Because if we're not protecting the rights of everybody, then what happens when I'm the person that's accused?
For sure.
Right? So, I mean, and I even tell my clients that. I'm like, look, I believe you. I know this person hurt you. They committed a crime. They should be punished. But they need to go through the system. Right? And if we take everything in our own hands and we circumvent that process, I don't think that we're any better than an abuser.
Wow, Hillary, let me tell you, this has been eye-opening for me in so many different ways. I've been ignorant to this process from the beginning. Like I said, I romanticized this whole process. You kind of settled me a little bit because I was losing faith in because a lot of my clients have not had justice.
Right.
And with that being said, I do have some people in New York who are interested in pursuing this. And I want you to tell people where you are again so they can get in contact with you.
So
and you may be getting some phone calls in the future from some people that I know.
Even if my firm can't help you, I'm happy
to
and let you know if we can, or maybe try to direct you to somebody that can if it's not the right case for us. But you can look us up online. It's Hach, Rose, Sharippa, and Chevry. My direct telephone number is 646-992-8138. You can always leave me a message. You can email me at hnappi, HNAPPI, at hrsclaw.com. Talk to a few lawyers.
Okay.
I think that the biggest thing in this process is selecting someone you trust, right? It's not enough that somebody's willing to go to court for you. You have to trust the guidance that they're giving you and believe in their legal knowledge, because if you don't trust that person, you're never going to be able to tell your story to them in full, and they need to hear it in full, right? I mean, I can't go in with half information, then I'm doing people a disservice. So I think that's the biggest thing. The other thing is this, and just so your listeners know, I think a lot of people right now, if they've been abused by an individual, they're feeling a little disheartened because law firms are not advertising for them, right? That you're not seeing an ad on television during a Yankee game looking to
Exactly.
a foster parent or looking
You were the
to a
only
parent.
one I came across that I saw that. That's why it was so intriguing. Yeah,
So,
they are not being advertised to us.
look, we're out there and we're advertising because we're a business, but we're
Sure,
not advertising in what I view as like an ambulance chasing way.
sure,
We have enough work, right? So we're picking cases where we can help people and where we think we can help people. Um, I have a couple of cases against individuals. I don't necessarily rule everything out, but to be honest, the facts have to be right, right? And you know, we all the ducks have to kind of line up. That being said, um, there is a bill right now to possibly extend the CVA in New York.
Mhm.
New Jersey passed a similar statute, so people who live in New Jersey who've been sexually abused have until 2021 to file a claim. This is a conversation across the country. Some states are sort of looking to abolish the statute of limitations altogether.
Mhm.
So call a lawyer, ask about your rights. It's important. The worst thing that's going to happen is that person's going to tell you, "I'm sorry, I can't file."
They
a suit
can't. They
for you."
can't. Right. Right.
It doesn't ever hurt to reach out, you know. And the other thing is this: maybe you find someone on the other end of the phone that can direct you to something that brings you some sort of peace. Our firm
Sure.
is also kind of just out there trying to give information to people. When the bill first passed, before we even started advocating, I was going to victim support groups on my own just to sort of learn and listen because I didn't think that I could do my clients a service without educating myself. So again, just reach out to different lawyers, see if you get a good feel for people. You have to trust them, right? And I think that in this situation, you're trusting them with what was the worst thing that ever happened to you. So
Sure.
it's not the same as being in a car accident. And you're like, well, I'm going to sue an insurance company. Like, let
Right.
me close my eyes and Google and see who I come up with.
For sure.
There are a lot of firms out there. So, I mean, there's a chance that someone's going to be able to help you.
Amazing. Hillary, thank you so much.
Thank
I know
you so
she
much for your
told.
time, Paul.
Oh, come on. It was
Great.
amazing. I know she told you to contact a bunch of different attorneys, but I think you'd be okay if you contacted her. I think you'd be in good hands. So, again, thank you so much, Hillary.
Thank you.
And we really appreciate it. And I know everyone else does. So thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Have a great
All
one.
right. You too. Bye-bye.